desirous and excited to be used of God to impact our community, to impact our culture, to help people understand there is a God in heaven who loves them, is ready to forgive them and change their life from the inside out and change their eternity. But yet we hit kind of the immovable object, as it were, and somebody who is obstinate and hard towards that message. And we try to do things and structure things and help things, and it just doesn't seem to be working. Or worse yet, it seems almost that those that we encounter are completely opposed to it. What are we to do then? How do we, if we could put it in Solomon's words tonight maybe, how do we have wisdom for dealing with the wicked, especially those that are in positions of authority? How can we be a world changer in the midst of a world that is opposed to God, hence the word wicked, and doesn't want to be changed by God or anybody else? I'd remind us tonight as we look at our text, God is in the business of changing our lives and the lives of those around us. And no matter how frustrated or discouraged you may be from what you may see at your job that seems opposed to God, and in your community that seems opposed to God, and maybe in our state or even in our nation that seems opposed to God, my friend, today, can I just tell you, Solomon has a message for how we can have wisdom in dealing with those who are opposed to God, even if they are in positions of authority over us. Now, lest you say, that sounds well and good, but do we have any historical proof? I would remind us of some of the key people of the Scriptures. I'm thinking of a teenage Jewish girl who was being raised by her cousin, who gets called by bizarre circumstances for a beauty contest for an unsaved king, who ultimately is used of God to do what? Deliver the Jewish nation under his reign. And her name was what? Esther. Somebody who had wisdom in dealing with those who were completely opposed to God, and yet God used her in a great way to change her world around her, even though the person she was dealing with was opposed to God. I'm thinking of another teenager named Daniel. He's stripped away from his home at a time where our kids are just barely figuring out how to use the buttons on their Xboxes. He's stripped away from his home. No mom, no dad, no siblings, no support. And what happens? He is taken to a completely foreign place, forced to learn a new language, forced to learn a new way of thinking. So their ideas about religion are being forced upon him. And yet you find a young man who just keeps in his heart, I'm going to follow the Lord and be a blessing to those who God has put me around. And he becomes the right hand to several pagan kings, people who wanted nothing to do with God, and yet God used him to change his world and impact even some of those kings to put their faith from their religion into God. My friend, my point is this. We could go on with some more historical illustrations from the Bible and even Christian history, but I want to encourage you tonight. Solomon has some wisdom for you and I right here about how we can have wisdom in dealing with those who are opposed to God, or as the Bible term might be, even wicked, even if they are the most dirty dog you can think of, and they're maybe even in a position of authority over you. What can you do about that? So, here's what Solomon wants to talk to us about. He exhorts us as the reader to live alongside of and influence the unsaved, even when their decisions are frustrating to us. If there was a thought I could get us to walk away with tonight, it would be this. Wise people can work with the wicked to accomplish God's will around them. Wise people can work with the wicked to accomplish God's will around them. Solomon here has just finished in verse 29 of chapter 7 saying, God has always desired and has designed mankind to have a relationship with him. But mankind rebelled against that, and thus sin entered into the world. And man by sin continues to find new ways to sin. That's what their heart is set and bent for. They invent ways. They scheme out ways. They are set towards finding ways to oppose the Lord. And some are very blatant. Others just self-led, indulgent living. And they want to do what they want to do. So Solomon says, well, here's how you deal with those who do what they want to do, how they want to do, and are opposed to our God. And so he gives us some wisdom. What's the very first thing we need to learn? We need to learn, number one, when able, honor civil authorities. Solomon here begins in verse number 1, and he invites us. He says, who is a wise man? Point them out to me. He says, who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? In other words, who not only is wise, but you can see the fruit of their wisdom by how they conduct themselves, how they think, how they're able to view the world around them. He says about this wise person that it makes their face to shine. Their attitude is different, and it says the boldness of his face shall be changed. In other words, it's kind of about determination. In other words, he's saying a wise person's attitude and their actions are different than the world around him. And he says, who is a wise man? And in a way, he's inviting us or appealing to us to be wise individuals. And in this context, he gives this a hypothetical in verse 2. Note what he says. I counsel thee to keep the king's commandment. He gives us a hypothetical situation that would be certainly applicable and pertinent in his time. He says, imagine this scene where there is a king. In Eastern culture, it's not like our democratic nation. It was a republic at one point, but now I suppose we're a democracy. And so it's not like our system. In ancient Near Eastern times, there was what? A king. And that king ruled unchallenged unless there was somebody powerful enough to lead a coup or an insurrection or another warring king to come and defeat him and remove him. And so there were kings that ruled absolutely. And so Solomon says, say you have the opportunity, say you have the privilege, like a Daniel or like Solomon or somebody else who was near a king or was a king, but he says, imagine you're there with this ruler, this civil authority, and you're an officer in his court. In other words, he relies upon you for advice and counsel. He says, I want you to think about this civil authority here and how you can have wisdom to deal with them. And so he says in verse 2, I counsel thee to do what? Keep the king's commandment, and in regard to the oath of God. He gives you a command, and your response to that command, your response to the civil authority should be weighted by the latter part of the verse, the oath of God. You see, such a person in this hypothetical scenario would have taken an oath to the king to serve, but it's generally agreed that this indicates God's establishment of civil authority and thus his commitment to monitor that authority line. Our response is to treat the office of civil authority with its decrees as before a king, or in our nation, somebody who's an elected official, but we are always to look beyond that elected official and understand that our heart towards authority is ultimately demonstrated as a heart towards God. You say, what do you mean, Pastor? I mean, just because somebody's elected into the office, we need to be honoring of that office as authority is ordained by God, and then we need to always look beyond that person and say, you know what, how I respond and how I speak of and how I treat this person in authority says a lot about what I believe my God has established in authority. One author put it like this: all authority descends from God, and our superiors bear the image of the divine power, which God imprints upon them, which whoso defaceth that figure shall also be answerable to the Lord for that same action and manner. What is he saying? He's saying this: when God established civil government and lines of authority, they became answerable and accountable to him. And so what they do, man or woman in that position, they answer to God for what they do with that level of authority, with that level of accessibility in that culture. And we then are to look at that position and treat it as unto the Lord. I'm reminded of Paul's words in Romans chapter 13 where he said, the powers that be, they are ordained of God. Our submission to them is to be a demonstration of our faith. And so Solomon says, honor the office as it's a commandment of God to honor those in authority. And then he says, be cautious about perceived violations against the office or attempting to remove yourself from that area, as it would carry consequences. Note what he says in verse 3. Be not hasty to go out of the king's sight. Stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever pleaseth him. Solomon warns against removing yourself from the position because you're disgusted by the decisions made by the one in authority, and that's what he means by trying to get out of the king's sight. But he says, also be cautious for this. Be cautious against trying to take a stand against your king. When he says standing in an evil thing, what Solomon's talking about there is don't become a party to some level of insurrection or some coup against the king. Why? Because he says at the end, the king does whatsoever pleaseth him. We have to keep in mind that Eastern rulers in that day, they held the power of life and death in their very words and their hands. And they also often used that power very capriciously, did they not? They were not elected by the people. They were not answerable to the people. And some leaders ruled as benevolent dictators, but for the most part, rulers in their time were tyrannical despots who permitted nothing to stand in their way of what they wanted to fulfill in their desires. And so Solomon says, you want some wisdom? Let me give you some wisdom. Honor the office as unto God, as God's the one who establishes lines of authority. He says, be cautious then about perceived violations against that office or trying to remove yourself and get away from it. And then he says, those under authority, he wants us to remember in verse 4, have a very limited ability to question or correct authority. Note what he says in verse number 4. Where the word of the king is, there is what? Power. And who may say unto the king, what doest thou? A conscientious ruler should be aware of their obligation to the Lord as the sovereign ruler, and they should be very sensitive to the constituency that put them into office or that they serve. But we know that's not always the case, is it? Right? Those in authority do not often recognize this position is not mine. It's a stewarded position that God established and allowed in human history and in conduct. And they're rarely as sensitive to the constituency except for when it comes to re-election time, right? Hence, subjects are tempted then. We're tempted to step in to try to help the ruler out and to set them straight. And this hypothetical scenario that Solomon's given, he said, imagine there's a king, and imagine you are one of his servants in that court, and he does rely upon you, and he does talk to you, or she does reference you about things, and you speak back to them, and instead of giving them what they want to hear or phrasing it in a way that's palatable for them to hear, you try to correct them about what they are doing. He says, how do you think that's going to go? He says, those that are in authority have a very limited ability to question or correct the king. As the king decrees came from a position of authority, his subjects are to remember that their corrections to the king have very little backing. As a king would be autocratic, one didn't have the luxury of correcting them. Maybe I could put it like this. Nina, one of my daughters, has been asking a lot of questions about traffic and driving and why do we do this and why do we do that in the car. And one of the questions that she has gotten and cemented finally in her mind is what the color of the lights mean and when you can do this and what you can do. But for a long time, she struggled with this, right on red. Oh, Dad, it's red. You can't do that. And some places in Kettering, you can't do that. But, right on red. Oh, Dad, you can't turn right now. Well, I can turn right now. No, Dad, you need to stop the car. No, Dad, no, you can't. It's red, And she's being a backseat driver. How much power or authority does she have in that car? Boop. Do I drive the car as it pleaseth me? Yes, according to verse 4, right? What's the king do? The king has the power, and you can't say, what doest thou? Solomon's saying, be thoughtful and cautious. If you're going to be wise in dealing with those who are opposed to God, especially those who are in authority, you need to remember what limited power and ability you have in this realm of humanity. Obviously, you have great power with the Lord, or we should say the Lord has great power through us and through this situation. But sometimes we get it in our mind because of American democracy that we are going to be a bunch of backseat drivers, and we need to remember we have a very limited platform. Now, Pastor, what are you saying here? You're talking about honoring the office. You're talking about being cautious. You're talking about when able, just do your honoring to them because they have a great position of authority, and be careful about questioning them as you have a limited platform. Does that mean we are never to question those who are in authority, especially if they choose a wicked agenda? No. Certainly we are to, as Peter said in the New Testament, obey God rather than men. But can I tell you what he did not say? What Peter did not say? What Paul did not say? What Solomon's not saying that we as Americans are awfully prone to do because of our culture? He did not say we are to be ugly, angry, and undermining of those in the offices of authority. I said, he said, not to be ugly, angry, and undermining of those who are in positions of civil authority over us. You say, why is that a big deal? All you have to do is turn on the TV for whatever mainstream media you want to turn on, whatever cable news network, whatever radio station is your favorite news talk to turn on. You know what you hear? A lot of vitriol, do you not? Ugliness, anger, a constant subversive attitude. You say, oh, you're a Republican? Oh, you're a Democrat? It's on both sides, people. Well, I'm a libertarian. It's on that side, too. I'm in the Green Party. Just kidding. Nobody's in the Green Party, right? So, two people in America. But my point is this. When you read the scriptures about people who did walk wisely towards those that were in authority and those that were opposed to God, you do not see a militant, angry, ugly attitude. How did Joseph deal with Pharaoh? How did Moses deal with another Pharaoh? How did Daniel and Esther deal with him? How did Nehemiah deal with the king that was a pagan? Did you see this? Well, you're going to do what I tell you to do. And I'll tell you another thing, king. You're not going to tell me what to do with my God. You don't find this angry, vitriolic attitude. But I fear here in American culture, we almost think it's okay because we don't want our independence ever threatened. And we want the freedom to speak our mind. We are very foolishly overtaken in our Christianity by that which does not honor God. And you know why we don't have more platform to be a world changer with those who are in positions that are opposed to God? Because we don't even honor them. We don't honor them as civil authorities as we ought. Again, when they have a godless agenda, certainly we obey God rather than man, but it doesn't mean we get to act ungodly towards them and speak in the church poorly about them. We should honor those who are in civil authority. You want to make a difference in this world? You want to change those around you that are in authority, whether they're in civil governments like Solomon's talking about here, or in your workplace as a superior to you, then my friend, it starts with being honorable towards them. But number 2 tonight, be discerning and be patient in your interactions with them. Be discerning and be patient in your interactions with them. Note what he goes on to say in verse number 5. Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart, note this, discerneth both time and judgment. Because to every purpose there is time and judgment. Solomon continues here by saying we need to be discerning and patient in our interactions with those. And he says discernment will reveal to you an opportunity to speak to the individual who's opposed to God, to speak to that person who is perhaps your superior, who is perhaps in a position of authority over you. So as one continues to be responsible and be valuable and be honoring towards that person who is in charge, the affinity from that person will grow of you and in you. This would procure here a level of favor for you. What does he say here in verse number 5? Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing. What's he saying? If you were in the king's court, and you were gracious, and you were kind, and you did honor the office, even when you didn't agree with it, you left him as accountable, her as accountable to it. He says, when you would keep the commandment, you would honor that king. He says, can I tell you something? You would feel no evil thing. You would have a level of protection and favor that would produce trust and opportunity. In fulfilling duties, the time would come when a wise person would be able to exercise great influence upon the ruler. One person said it like this: wisdom helps us understand people and situations and to figure out the right thing to do at the right time to do it. That's what discernment will do when we have wisdom. Too often, though, I fear this. Christians remove themselves from a position God intended them to be in to make a difference before the trust has been built for them to make the difference. What do you mean, Pastor? I mean, before we can even get to the point that we have influence, We are too offended by that person in authority not treating us the way we think they should treat us. We're too frustrated with what their agenda is. We're too frustrated with their foolishness. We're too frustrated with what we would call their stupidity. And so we are either too hasty and quick to bolt from a position God allowed us to be in, or the opposite. We are constantly breaking their trust while we're in that position. And so before we could ever make a difference in their life, we've already removed ourselves from contention to make a difference in their life. And Solomon here is calling us to make a difference, and to do so we need discernment. The right time to say the right thing in the right way. I'm thinking of a chaplain friend of mine who ministered in a particular state that is very heavy in one religion. And he got to meet the local mayor and the local police chief. They were both very steeped in this religion. And he said, you know what? I was just cautious and I was kind and I always went by to pray, and they never wanted me to come by because I wasn't their religion. And I just kept coming by, let them know, love them. If they ever need anything, I'm around. He said, and this goes on for a few years. And they got nothing to ask him, nothing to say to him, not a word to say to him. And finally, one day, there was some big turmoil in one of their lives. And the individual calls him in and says, you know what, you've been coming by for years. You've always been gracious. You've always told me you're praying for me. I want to talk to you. And thus begin a conversation. Ultimately, that man converted from his religion to Christianity. He put his trust in Christ to forgive him, to free him, to save him, to help him. But you know what it took? Discernment. My chaplain friend could have just barged in there, guns blazing, Bible open. But you know what he did? Discerning when and how. You say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do that. I don't know when that would happen. God has promised He would grant you wisdom if you just ask it. Isn't that what He said in James chapter 1 and verse number 6? Sincere Christians typically see the situation through their own framing rather than God's, thus lacking the discernment necessary to judge when and how to speak to those who are opposed to God, especially if they are our superiors. And so he says, discernment will reveal an opportunity. He says, patience will provide that opportunity. Patience will provide that opportunity. Look what he says in verse number 6. Because to every purpose there is time and judgment, therefore the misery of man is great upon him. For he knoweth not that which shall be, for who can tell him when it shall be? Solomon calls the individual in such a position here to exercise discernment, but also to practice patience, since one must example trustworthiness over a period of time and await the proper time to speak or act. The burdens upon that person no doubt will be heavy, and thus it will be a misery, as he says it, as we wait. But we must maintain patience. Moreover, in spite of the moral burdens we carry, and because of the problems that take place that would tempt us to act impetuously, we should be cautious, we should be patient. In short, Solomon's telling them this. People in authority, they come and they go, especially during his time. Kings came, kings went. They were toppled regularly. And he exhorts them, exercise patience. When you're in the presence of somebody opposed to God, when you're with somebody who doesn't want anything to do with God, you be patient because you don't know what the future holds. Isn't that what he says in verse number 7 where he says, for he knoweth not that which shall be, for who can tell him when it shall be? Because we don't know what is coming later, and we may not appreciate what's taking place in the present, it may be difficult for us to wait. And we are simply frail people, aren't we? We don't know what is coming down, even in the course of a day, much less the future. So what must we do? When we have somebody in our life opposed to God, especially if they are in a position of authority, if they are our superior in some capacity, if they're in our immediate sphere of influence or beyond our sphere of influence, what should we do? We should be discerning, ask God for wisdom to help us know when and how, and then we need to be patient. Trust God as we don't know even the end of tonight. We need to trust God that He is at work in our life and in the lives of those around us. And we're going to agree with Him. We're going to live for Him. See, those who've influenced authorities haven't been obnoxious about their faith and bolted at the first offense. Non-Christian people will act like, surprisingly, non-Christian people. That's a surprise, right? I can't believe this person who's my superior. I can't believe this person that's elected to office would act this way. Well, if they are opposed to God and non-Christian people, why would we be shocked? People who've not been forgiven and freed by Jesus, they will not make decisions that are holy or are in alignment with the Word. So rather than get upset about it, as the typical American Christian does, maybe what we ought to do is seek to be an influence upon them. Daniel had multiple times that patience and discernment yielded a change, did it not? Esther had times of patience and discernment. Joseph had times of patience and discernment. Even the Apostle Paul had times of what? Patience and discernment. My friend, tonight, if we are going to make a difference, some of the wisdom we need to walk with, Solomon says, is not only honor those who are in civil authority, but certainly we need to be discerning and patient in our interactions with them. And that comes day by day. I read a great quote that said this: "Great men are remembered for their extraordinary days, but they are made on ordinary ones." What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying before Daniel ever got to lead Nebuchadnezzar to the Lord and convert him from his false religion, Daniel had to have a string of normal days, consistent days, faithful, faith-filled days as an ordinary day before he saw the extraordinary day. Before he went into the lion's den, he had to just do what he needed to do in the court of the king the day before that, consistent in his relationship with the Lord, consistent in his action towards those who are opposed to God. And so Solomon ends this idea of wisdom with those who are opposed to God by saying, remember that even man's power has limitations. As he concludes this section here, and he's talking in this sense of there would be those opposed to God, and therefore they would be wicked and they would be unholy towards God. He says, though they may seem to have ultimate authority, let me remind you that even they have limitations. Let's say you've lived this way and they have not changed at all and it's only gotten worse and more severe. He says, remember that man's power has limitations. Death has the ultimate power even over the most wicked of ruler, somebody who abuses their authority perpetually. Look what he says in verse 8. There is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death, and there is no discharge in that war, neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. Solomon continues his instructions by putting perspective into the mix about the duration of a wicked ruler. He reminds us that no matter how powerful someone may be in the physical realm, there are many things that are beyond his or hers control. He says here they have no ability to retain their spirit. They have no ability to keep their intellect, emotion, and will, their soul, as it were, contained within their physical body. They can't do anything with that outside their physical body. Death will come and take that from them. They can't stop that. He goes further than says they can't retain their spirit. He said there's nothing they can do to change the day of death. Building upon that thought, Solomon highlights the complete inability for anyone to exercise a level of control about the timing of their death. Even a king, a righteous king or a wicked king, will die eventually. So he says, may we remember here that death has the ultimate power. He even says there that a powerful ruler, even if they're a wicked powerful ruler and they seem to have all this power, they can't stop the discharge of war. What's he mean by that? The power of another kingdom or military power coming from another ruler and disposing him. Though they may be able to subdue most, it's highly unlikely that they could subdue all armies and all kings worldwide. Well, what's something else they may try to rely upon or relax in? He says they may think their own wickedness, what they can indulge in or what they've given to others to come back as a favor to them, could save them. But look what he says at the end of verse number 8. Neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. You see, no amount of jockeying, experiencing, or maneuvering from all their sinful endeavors can negotiate or change the outcome of their death. Solomon wants to encourage us that, listen, we're to be a difference maker. We are to have wisdom in how we walk towards them, but he reminds us, listen, even if they never change, you don't have to lose heart, because the enemy seem to be unchanged and unhindered in what they want to do. There comes a time that every man's power meets its limits. And death has the ultimate power, even over the most wicked of rulers. Though they may seem to have it all, in God's view, it's all been to their detriment. Look what he says in verse number 9. All this have I seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There's a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. Having stated all these matters about those in power who rule wickedly, Solomon pauses, and he contemplates and reflects upon what he's seen here. And his conclusion is this: such a person who has abused authority, such a person who has done as they desire to do, such a person who has opposed God and your efforts in their life to try to help them understand who the Lord is and what He's able to do in and through their life, that person may have enjoyed all that they enjoyed, and they may have abused those around them to be able to enjoy what they enjoy. But his conclusion is this: they have ruled over other people to their own detriment. Meaning, they may have had great power, they may have enjoyed significant pleasure and ruled relatively unopposed, but being apart from God have made all these things evidence of their coming condemnation and their sinful state. They thought it helped them in this life, and they chose to ignore the reality to come. And the reality to come says, you are under condemnation, and these things are evidence of your coming damnation. They may have had it all, but their estate with God was still bankrupt. And Solomon reminds us tonight, lest we get haughty in our own self and think they're the ones who need to be cautious. He reminds us too, listen, death comes for us all, and we want to be very cautious on what and how we've lived, and that it has not perverted what God wanted to do in and through our lives. Listen, the world around us is filled with those who are living out chapter 7, verse 29 every day. They scheme every day to try to indulge sin and self in their life. Every day they want to do what they want to do, how they want to do it, when they want to do it. And they have no thought for God, seeking out sinful living and self-indulgence. They deny there's a holy God in heaven who loves them, who can forgive them, and wants to change their life and their eternity. Further, many of those individuals inhabit offices in our workplace, do they not? They are in city council seats in our own city. Our state Congress is filled with them, and even our nation's capital is overtaken by such people. Rather than throw up our hands in despair or try to zealously remove ourselves from that environment, can I call us tonight what Solomon wants us to do? May we deal wisely with those who are opposed to God, even if they are in positions of authority. Verse 1's invitation to have our attitude and our actions changed in order to change those around us is still as needed today as it was thousands of years ago when he wrote this. You and I have the opportunity, my friend, to make a difference. The question is, will we? If we're going to do that, we need our outlook changed. We need to look around us and realize that God has put us alongside of those opposed to God to influence them and to be a blessing to them. That we can have wisdom in how we treat them, wisdom in how we speak with them, and whether they are our boss at work or some other position of authority in our life, or maybe they are just in our community here in some sphere of influence we have, and they're just adamantly opposed to God, and you say, boy, it eats me up. Boy, it eats me up what the president's doing, or it eats me up what my congressman's doing. It eats me up what the city council does. It eats me up what my boss is doing. It eats me up what my family members are doing. It eats me up what my neighbors are doing. Tonight, can we turn away from that outlook and attitude? Instead, have one that says, you know what, that may be taking place, but my God can and will work through me. But will I honor those in those positions of authority? Will I be patient and discerning? And while I remember that ultimately there's a God in heaven that this person is going to stand before, and I need to be the one who is an example of Jesus Christ to them. I need to be the one that asks for God's help in interacting and dealing with this individual. I need to be the one that they look at me and they realize there is something different about the way they act, the way they think, the way they talk. They are not bound by my cares. They're not bound by what's going on at their work. They're not bound by what's going on in this nation, whether you're on this side or that side. There's something different about that person. Those are the people that have made a difference in their community and in their nation. And so tonight, would we exercise wisdom towards those around us who are opposed to God, especially those who are in places of civil government? God wants to use us. Solomon tells us how that can happen, but will we appeal to that kind of wisdom? The invitation's here from chapter 8, verse 1, but will we be that kind of person tonight? Let's take a moment with our heads bowed, our eyes closed. We want to give you a moment of invitation. It's where we invite you with no one looking around and nobody needing to get up except for those who maybe need to play instruments or get ready for the baptistry. I just want to give you a moment here to consider what's going on in your heart and your life. When you talk about your boss, how's it framed? When you talk about a family member opposed to God, what's your attitude like? We talk about people in positions of political power in our country or even at our city level. What does it sound like? Does it sound like the attitude and actions of somebody making a difference for Christ? Concerned about that person who's going to stand before the Lord eventually? Or does it sound like somebody just angry, upset, and worked up? Tonight we're going to take a moment as the piano plays. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. We just give you an opportunity to respond.
Well, dear Lord, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for the message we heard. And Lord, I pray that we would respond with patience and discernment as it writes in Ecclesiastes, Lord, in response to authority. God, I pray that this message would go with us even as we go out this week in our workplace, Lord, those around us who are in our authority, that we would be discerning and that we would exercise patience. Lord, I just pray that you would help us in these areas and give us grace with that. Pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. Well, church family, we're excited for the baptism that is about to happen, but before we do, they're still getting prepared. If you would help me by standing to your feet, we're going to sing a few songs as they prepare for baptism. We're going to sing Only Trust Him, hymn number 312. Number 312, we're going to sing Only Trust Him as we wait for them to prepare for baptism. Come His blood, rich blessings to bestow. Plunge now into the crimson flood that washes white as snow. Only trust Him, only trust Him, only trust Him now. He will save you, He will save you, He will save you now. Great singing. If you would turn over to hymn number 281. Hymn number 281. We're going to sing, Oh, How I Love Jesus. Oh, are we ready, Pastor Paul? Almost. All right, one verse of Oh, How I Love Jesus, hymn number 281. Sing it out as we finish off our singing for the night and get ready for baptism. There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its worth. It sounds like music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because He first loved me. Thank you. You may be seated.
We're very excited tonight to get to enjoy a baptism here. There we go. A baptism here on a Wednesday night. And we're thankful tonight to have Jocelyn, who's put her faith in Jesus Christ and wants to follow the Lord publicly by saying, what happened on the outside, I want you to know, or inside, I want you to know on the outside. She's following the Lord, identifying with Him in believer's baptism. So, Jocelyn, do you know that you put your trust in Christ? All right. On that public profession, I'm going to baptize you as my sister in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, buried in the likeness of His death, raised in the likeness of His resurrection. Amen. Get a photo with Mom. All right. One more. There we go. Wonderful. I want to encourage you to do this. Let's take a moment. Pastor Brother Jordan's going to lead us in one more song of praise. Let's give Jocelyn a moment to be able to get changed so you can welcome her in the foyer there and let her know how excited you are about her decision to follow Jesus Christ in her heart and make it public now, all right? So let's take a moment to stand and sing another song of praise as Jocelyn gets ready. Thanks, Jocelyn.
And stand with us, and let's turn to 250, hymn number 250, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." And church family, sing this out. Isn't it a wonderful thing that we have put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, and we can trust Him day by day, moment by moment. So let's sing hymn number 250, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to rest upon His promise, just to know thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Oh, how sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust His cleansing blood, just in simple faith to plunge me 'neath the healing, cleansing flood. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. I'm so glad I learned to trust Thee, precious Jesus, Savior, friend. And I know that Thou art with me, wilt be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus. much for coming to Faith Baptist Church. Please stick around and wait for Jocelyn, to come down and to greet her. And we're so thankful that you came here tonight. You are dismissed.